What is up, everyone? I'm Mike with woodshopmike.com, and today I'm going to show you how we transformed our laundry room from this to this. So let's jump right in and get started.
Alright, just so we can get a full picture of where we're starting from, let's take a look around the rest of the laundry room. Well, you know what they say, things are going to get worse before they get better, and this project is no exception. I start things off by taking out the original mud sink. Hopefully I can reuse this down in the shop for cleaning out paintbrushes and such. I know by the time this room is done, I don't want to have cleaning supplies anywhere close to this place. Now I work on removing the vinyl floor. That's seen its fair share of use. To do this, I first use a utility knife to cut the vinyl into manageable sizes, and then I proceed to cutting through the underlayment with my circular saw set just deep enough to barely cut all the way through the material. With a grid cut into the floor, I grab a pry bar and hammer and start pulling up the underlayment. I found it's easiest to work in sections that are about 2 by 2, and as I pull up the plywood, I go ahead and pull any nails or staples that may have been pulled through the plywood rather than coming up with it. I found that this step is a good opportunity to work out any frustrations you may be carrying around. To get ready for the additional base cabinet, I go ahead and first remove the countertop from the existing base cabinet. I simply remove a couple of screws that were holding it in place and then lift it free. Unfortunately, the countertop had also been secured to the wall with adhesive that ended up damaging the drywall. Oh well, nothing that can't be fixed with a little joint compound. Hey, look, a new base cabinet. Now, I hope you enjoy watching me try and wiggle this into place without having to first remove the door and trim. Oh well, I guess I can always dream, right? I'll just say I was already planning to take the door off anyways and just brush it off as being ahead of schedule. Or at least that's what I'll tell myself. With the door and trim now out of the way, I can easily slide the cabinet into place. And if you're interested in seeing how to build a base cabinet, go ahead and open up the video linked above and then come right back here to finish watching this renovation. With the cabinet set in place, I secure it to the studs using some 2.5 inch long pocket hole screws. I also secure it to the other cabinet with some 1.25 inch screws. So as much as I really dig this weathered gray subfloor look, I'm not sure it's the best flooring choice for a laundry room. So with that decided, I start off by spreading out some thin set using a 1/4 inch square notch trowel. Once the sheet of Durock is in place, I screw it down with 1.25 inch cement board screws, spaced 1 inch from the edge and roughly 8 inches apart inside the board. I space additional sheets 1/4 inch apart and stagger the seams. Once all the Durock is installed, I tape and mud the seams with alkali-resistant fiberglass mesh tape along with latex fortified thinset. So while I finish up laying this Durock, let me tell you about another cool feature inside the Home Depot mobile app. Their project calculator helps you figure out the amount of materials you'll need for a project, everything from tile and paint to countertops and mulch. Simply choose what material you're working with and then fill out the empty fields. Once you're done, hit calculate and you've got your results. Off camera, I went ahead and laid out my pattern just to make sure I had everything figured out correctly. Here I'm using a laser to keep my center row straight, and I offset the center line of my tiles from the actual center of the room so that I would have even cuts on the left and right when I was all done. Once I'm happy with the layout, I trace the outside edge of my first pieces and then pick up all the tiles. And I start throwing down some thinset. For these tiles I'm using polymer modified thinset along with a 1.25 inch square notch trowel to spread out the material. To help make sure that the first two tiles are square, I use a framing square as a reference while I'm setting these first two. And it's been a while since I've laid tile, but even so, the thinset seemed a little thicker than it should have been. So after I put down a few tiles, I pulled one back up to check the coverage of the thinset on the back, and sure enough, I needed to adjust. So I went ahead and scraped up all of the thinset that I'd already laid down, which luckily was not that much. So after adding a little more water to the mix, I troweled out some thinset and just threw another tile down anywhere. When I pulled it back up, the result is exactly what I was looking for. Here you see I have full coverage of thinset on the underside of the tile, and that fully supports and secures the tile to the floor. After my first few tiles are down, I lay some tiles to the left and right of my first pieces, and I'm making sure to use a speed square along with my framing square, especially while laying this first course to make sure that the tiles stay on track. I also use spacers in between each tile to help hold them in place. After laying tile in the majority of the room, I let them set overnight for the thinset to cure, and the next day I batch cut all of the tiles for the left and right sides of the room, and since the space here was a little bit cramped, I'm using a smaller notched trowel to spread the thinset more easily. Oh, and hey, by the way, I want to let you know if you're wondering what tools or materials I'm using during this project, I have all of that listed in the description below, so check it out. For this project, we used Prism Grout by Custom Building Products. In general, the process of grouting is straightforward. In technical terms, you squish the grout between the tiles and then hold the float at almost 90 degrees to scrape off the excess. After the grout is set for 10 to 20 minutes, clean off the excess grout from the tiles with a damp sponge. Now, unfortunately, I didn't record this bit, but you simply use light pressure to wipe off the excess grout, rinsing your sponge often with fresh water, and only grout sections you can sponge down within about a 30-minute period. After the grout had dried for about 3 hours, I used a cheesecloth to buff down the tiles. In the past, I've also used a well wrung out sponge for this step, but that just doesn't seem to work as well for me. So for me, using a cheesecloth did a much better job at removing the majority of the haze left on the tiles at this point. However, after buffing with the cheesecloth, I did still go back with a slightly dampened clean sponge to give the floor one more good wipe down and remove just as much lingering grout dust as possible. We went with 5.5 inch tall baseboards and 3/4 inch quarter round to trim out the floor. I marked each of the wall studs and shot 2 nails into the board at each stud location. At each corner, I run one board flat to the wall and then coat the second board to the first. Once the fit is good, I nail it into place. Next, I remove the original crown molding from the top of the wall cabinets and replace it with cove molding. I pre-assembled the corner piece in the shop by gluing it together with Titebond Quick and Thick trim glue. With this piece nailed into place, I cut the remaining piece to size and nail it to the cabinets. After taping off the ceiling, I paint the walls, and as you can see, getting behind the top wall cabinet was not exactly easy. We used Behr Premium Plus with an eggshell sheen, and the color we chose is Silver Drop. After the walls had had a day to dry, I painted the trim and baseboards with semi-gloss paint in the color Polar Bear. To prep our cabinets for paint, I first needed to fill the grain. Since our cabinets are made from oak, if I skipped this step, we wouldn't have a smooth surface to our cabinets once the paint is completed. The product I used for this step is DAP's Premium Wood Filler, and I've got to say it's the best grain filler I've used thus far for painted surfaces. I thinned down the putty per the instructions and then applied it with a 2-inch wide putty knife. After the grain filler had dried, I sanded the surfaces smooth. As you see, the cabinets are now painted. I sprayed the finish on the cabinets to produce the smoothest surface possible, and also I masked off the entire room to prevent overspray from getting on everything. And for that reason, I didn't have a spot where the camera could be that it wouldn't also get covered in paint, so you'll have to use your imagination and pretend you saw me spraying the cabinets. The products I used to finish the cabinets are all by General Finishes. I used their stain blocking primer to seal in the tannins from our oak cabinets, and after 24 hours from the last coat of primer, I then applied a 4:1 ratio of their milk paint in the colors Snow White and Antique White respectively. And after another 24 hours, I applied 2 coats of their flat high performance top coat for a little extra durability. While the last coat of finish cures, I lay out a handful of 3-inch wide, 1/4 inch plywood pieces, and I use hot melt glue to make a template for the new countertop. I make sure to mark the front edge and take any necessary measurements for locating the overhang and sink opening. While I'm unpacking and transferring the template pattern to the countertop, I wanted to let you know this project is sponsored by my friends at the Home Depot. From versatile buying options, tool rentals, and thousands of how-to videos, the Home Depot has the tools and materials you need to keep building and get more done. Using my track saw, I cut the countertop to size, following the pattern from my template. Now, if you don't have a track saw, a circular saw with a board clamped to your countertop or workpiece as a guide will also work very well. Now it's time to lay out for the sink opening. On my template, I made a mark to locate the center of the sink in the sink cabinet. I then used the template that came with my sink as a guide for the sink's opening size. And after drawing all my cutout lines, I grab a drill with a 1/2-inch drill bit and drill a hole inset from each corner as a starting point for my jigsaw. And with each one of the corners drilled, I grab my jigsaw and cut out the opening. For this, you can use a coarse cutting blade to get the job done more quickly, assuming that you're also using a top mount sink like I am for this project. Also, while I'm trying to stay fairly close to the lines, I'm not overly concerned if I veer off course a bit, since the sink's flange will cover up the opening. So obviously, it's a good idea to check the fit at this point and make sure nothing else needs to be adjusted, but I was also so excited to see how the sink and faucet were going to look in the countertop, I had to take a quick minute to see. Before finishing the countertop, I break out my sander and sand up to 220 grit. Now, in all honesty, the countertop arrived in pretty good shape, and I could have gone ahead and stained it as is, but since I'm a bit of a perfectionist when it comes to sanding, I decided to take a few minutes and make sure it was good. We used Weathered Gray by Varathane to stain the countertop. I first applied a coat to the underside and then flipped it over after the stain had dried for a few minutes to stain the rest of the countertop. After the last coat of finish had dried for a couple hours on the cabinets, it was time to pull down all of that masking and painter's tape. This was a really fun moment in the project because we were finally able to see how all the different colors were coming together. And I don't know why, but pulling the masking out of the cabinets felt like I was in a game show or something, seeing what was behind door number 1. Or should I have chosen door number 4? I don't know. After the stain had dried for about 24 hours, I applied 2 coats of General Finishes flat high-performance top coat to seal and protect the countertop. After this finish had cured for a day or so, we brought it into the laundry room and set it into place. Now I transfer the sink cutout in the countertop to the stretchers in the sink cabinet, and then remove the countertop so I can use a jigsaw to cut away the necessary space for the sink without the risk of scratching up that beautifully finished new countertop. I also go ahead and just remove the front stretcher since it would be too thin anyways after cutting away for the sink opening. With the countertop back in place, I now secure it by running a few 1.5 inch long screws through the stretchers into the underside of the countertop. To secure the false drawer front to the sink cabinet, I first lay out where the perimeter of the false drawer front needs to be. Then I hold it in place with a few Bessie trigger clamps. Next, I grab a small piece of 1/4 inch plywood and secure it to the face frame using 5/8 inch long screws. Next, I screw through the plywood into the frame of the false drawer front using 1.5 inch long screws. Before setting the sink and the countertop, I install the strainer. This is done by first molding a ring of plumber's putty and setting it around the flange where the strainer will sit. Next, I press the strainer into the putty as firmly as possible. And after I flip over the sink, I install the gasket and lock nut per the manufacturer's instructions, doing my best to not twist the strainer in place. With the strainer secured in place, I now use a plastic scraper to remove the excess putty and then buff the sink with a paper towel. The sink we chose came with these clips to secure it to the counter, and per the instructions, these should be installed prior to setting the sink in place, but I didn't have any luck with that approach, so I ended up having to install them after the sink was set. And since our countertop is on the thicker side for what the sink's clips will accommodate, I had to drill some recesses into the underside of the countertop for the clips to register against. Now with the sink set, I now hook the clips into place again on the sink and tighten them down to secure them to the countertop. I wasn't able to get a shot of this from underneath the sink, which is a bummer because if I had, you would have gotten to see a clip fall and smack me in the face. Anyways, I don't show this in the video because I wanted the finish on the countertop to cure a bit longer, but I did run a bead of clear silicone caulk all the way around the edge of the sink and between the walls and countertop just to seal things up. Since we ended up moving the sink just a few inches to the left, I used a flexible drain kit by Snappy Trap. This ended up being a great solution and worked well, especially once I trimmed the flexible section of pipe to be the proper length. With the drain connected, I tightened down the supply lines for hot and cold water to the faucet, and with this, the sink is ready for use. Before I start changing out this light, I first turn off the power, cause I don't fancy getting electrocuted. So while I change out this light fixture, I want to tell you about another really cool feature in the Home Depot mobile app. So let's imagine that you came across an item during a project and you have no idea what it is. Take a picture of it with the image search function, and in seconds have the item identified, along with what options are available at your local store. Pretty cool, right? With the wiring connections finished up, we push the wires into the electrical box and then finish securing the fixture in place. One thing we really wanted to improve during this renovation was how to hang clothes that needed to air dry after being washed. We thought about building a collapsible drying rack that would be mounted to the wall, but after finding these on Home Depot's site, we had to give them a try. These racks are super easy to install and come with all the necessary hardware. The most difficult part was actually deciding where you wanted them to be. After installing all the drywall anchors, I just hold the rack in place and secure it to the wall with the included screws. So check out this collapsible drying rack. It easily opens up and holds a ton of clothing. And then when your clothes are dry, it easily folds back up to save space. The last detail in this project is hanging the new shaker style doors, which I also have a video on how to build shaker style doors, so if you're interested in that, go ahead and open the card that is above and then come right back and finish the rest of this video. To hang those doors, we went with concealed hinges and installed them following the manufacturer's guidelines. And what's great about these kind of hinges is that there's a fair amount of adjustability to them, so if the cabinet frame or door is a touch out of square, you can compensate for that with adjustments built into the hinge. To consistently drill for the knob placement, I made a jig from some scrap plywood with a hole where I wanted the knobs to be installed. I then superglued some strips to the side so that it would rest against the outside corner of the door. I made these strips overhang the front and back of the jig so that it's also reversible and can be used for the right or left side door.
Well, what do you think? We're thrilled with how this space came out and actually don't dread laundry day anymore. If you want to check out more home renovation videos from us, make sure to stick around and check them out coming up in the end cards in just a second.
Ah, you're still there. Awesome. Hey, if you enjoyed this video, I got another one queued up for you right here. And if you want other awesome content from me, check out those. Anyways, hope you enjoyed the video. Please hit the like and subscribe. And until next time, have fun making something.